Hi there, this is Shauna from the Foil Fox. Thanks so much for joining me today. I have these wonderful peonies. I have them in two ways. We'll go through both of these. It is using the Spellbinders Better Press Peony Background plate, and you can see what beautiful flowers are on here, and it just covers the whole plate. I have a piece of hot press watercolor paper and some Delicata Golden Glitz gold ink. Love this ink. It is my favorite gold ink of all. I do have the re-inker. That's very important. I am going to be better pressing this. You can see I took a piece of wide tape and I secured that plate down because it does chatter a little, and often I want to go through, run it through my die cutting machine once and then back again very slowly a second time, and I don't want it to move and then create kind of this double image. Now, the best way I have found for me to make sure I have my paper on there just right is I position it over the plate. I take a piece of tape. Now here, that purple tape I often use. It's for delicate surfaces, but I found it tears my hot press watercolor paper. So I like this Spellbinders craft tape for this, and I've just doubled it up there. I'm positioning that perfectly on there. And then I'm going to just put it down and then smush it in the center so that the paper sticks to the tape. So now it's in perfect position. You can see that my ink pad is quite inky, but I want it still have more ink to it. I want it really saturated. So I'm adding more of ink to it, and it's soaking in. And then I'm going to just add it to the background. Now, as you probably know, is when you have a better press plate, you can hot foil it. But I chose not to hot foil because I found that I can't get in when I have so much gold there, I'd have to foil that it doesn't go on as evenly as I like, but I knew that the ink would. So that's why I'm using the Golden Glitz. You could go ahead and hot foil it. Remember, you can hot foil plates, but the press plates, but you cannot take a hot foil plate and put it in the better press. You can see that I put a cardstock shim on top, ran it through my machine. Now, and I did go twice. You see, I didn't get a double image at all, and it was because I have that plate on my better press taped down. And then also, I'm cleaning off my plate just to make sure I don't have any extra ink. And I'm sorry if you end up hearing some cats in the background. They're very grumpy in the morning, and sometimes they complain, so you'll have to pardon them if you hear them. Now, I'm going to go on and dry this very, very well. And you can see this has such a gorgeous sheen to it. This is one of the reasons I just am in love with this ink. And I'm making sure it's very dry. Then I'm going to be using some distress inks here. And I like using the cubes because I can just smush on little bits of paint. I'm using here, started out with Shaded Lilac and Dusty Concord, but I will use a little bit of Seedless Preserve a little bit later. But I'm mixing these two together, and I'm using I do moisten it with water a little bit before I start the flower, but I'm using very little water here. I don't want to disturb the gold ink. And this is going to be quite soft, quite pastel. That's the way I thought I would do this one instead of the really bright colors. I'm going to add a little bit of the worn lipstick. And you can see the palette I'm using. This is an Art Impressions acrylic palette. I could use it. I have a glass surface where I could smush my inks right on that surface, but I like having a palette where I can move it around and it's not getting in my sleeve, and which so often happens. And so I use this acrylic palette an awful lot because you can use it for so many different mediums. So I'm just adding in bits of paint here and shading it where I can. Again, I'm going to keep it quite soft. I'm going to go through all of these flowers, but we'll speed it up as we go along. Now I'm using scattered straw and wild honey and going onto this large flower at the top and using exactly the same technique. And as I said, I'm using quite a small brush so I can, there's a lot of detail to these flowers, and the small brush really helps with that. So you can see that it continues on with adding more definition to it and more shading until my flower is all finished. And then I'll go on to the next one. I can never seem to stop fiddling and adding more and more ink to it, but it's better to go slowly than really fast. Now I'm using saltwater taffy, and I'm going to put it all over this flower using a little bit of water, and then now using the saltwater taffy mixed in with the Warren lipstick. And right now, the flowers are pastel, but and they look, really light. But when I color the leaves, it's just kind of magical. Then it just really makes those flowers pop as well as the leaves. For right now, I'm just going to go in and color all of these flowers, so you can get the idea of how I color them. I don't go all the way to the edges usually. I'll use let the very edges of the petals, often I will leave them white. Now I always keep a facial tissue in my hand in case I want to blot anything off. Now I'm going to use some of this, I'll have festive berry and some of the picked raspberry. I have just a little bit of a re-inker of the seedless preserve. If you want more intense colors, using the re-inkers really helps because their colors are very, the re-inkers are very concentrated, and so you can get some very intense colors. So whether you use the smooshing the ink on your palette or using the re-inkers, both work very nicely, or like in my case, I use a little bit of both. So you can see this one, as I get down towards the bottom, I'm getting into a little bit more intense colors, but I'm varying the flowers also a little bit in color, though I'm using a lot of the same color palette. I do vary the flowers by either making them a little bit more pastel or a little bit darker, or like in this case, I'm using some yellow, but I will mix it with a little bit of pink as well. That actually goes very well with the yellow. Here I'm using more intense color again. And just going to get these flowers on the edges. And you can see each flower that you paint, and as you fill in this whole background, you'll see that it really starts to come to life. At first you're wondering if you can actually see the flowers, but they really do come to life. And you can see I'm varying the flower color as I move around on this background. There are a bunch of flowers to this, and there's a few buds that are just really cute. So I think that I'll add this, put a little bit of yellow here too. The other one, I use some of the lavender. Now I'm going to go on and I'm going to do the leaves. Now the leaves, I'm using crushed olive, peeled paint, and a little bit of pine needle. Pine needle is quite an intense color, and I like using it with it, but I do use it very carefully. And I went over all the entire leaf with the crushed olive, and then using the peeled paint. And then I'll use a little bit of that pine needle as a shade, is for shading. And pine needle has a little bit of blue to it, and I actually like that. So we'll go through all of these leaves, and you can see as I go through and I do these leaves that it's really making these flowers start to pop more, just like I mentioned before. And we're getting all of these leaves all done. So the panel is done, and I'm going to set it aside for now. You can see it all there because we're going to go on to another card, and then we'll finish both of them at the same time. So I have another piece of hot press watercolor paper. I'm starting with scattered straw, and I'm blending it on to the top of the card. Then I'm going on to Worn Lipstick. I did not change blending brushes. I'm just using the same one, but starting from light and then going to dark. Next, I'll use the Festive Berries, and I'm getting even more intense. And then the final color I'm going to use is Seedless Preserve, which is that really beautiful purple color. I really like using this color combination on whenever I'm doing kind of an ombre effect. And I really want to get that purple in there. So I'm just really going to add this on. Make sure it's nice and saturated on the bottom. And I've got my other hand is I have a Post-it note just so that I'm not smearing the ink. I'm going to dry this really, really well. And then we're going to do the same thing as we did before. We're going to use our Better Press platforms here. And I'm going to mount this just like I did before, really carefully. Make sure it's on there perfectly. And I'm going to put the double stick tape. Now, the one thing to keep in mind with this is that I wanted the yellow to be up at the top of the plate. There really does seem to be a top and a bottom to the plate. And so I want to make sure that I have the yellow mixed in with the yellow right where the top of the plate is. So I'm going to check this one more time, and I see, oh, that's the top, and I want to make sure that my yellow is up at the top, and it is. And I'm using the Better Press black ink. Now, when I use the background, I'm not going to make it really heavy, but I'm going to make sure that I have plenty of ink on the flowers. Now, this is a specially formulated ink, and so it just for the Better Press, it works extremely well, and it's very, very crisp. I'm going to wipe off this excess. It's stubborn ink. And I'm just going to try to take a little bit off the background, but then put a little bit back onto the flowers. Now I'll add my plate, my top plate there, making sure my yellow's up where the top of the flowers are. And so there you are. I have the top where the yellow is. I managed to get it right. And I'm going to just gently pull this off, set everything aside. And keep in mind I had that my base plate was still taped down so I could run it through twice. Now I'm going to go back to my acrylic palette, and I'm going to use these inks again. I'm using Scattered Straw and Wild Honey. Now I'm just moistening it with water right now, just so that this flower, just so that I can lift some of this ink off, so that I can add more ink and be able to shade it more. Now you've seen me color this in the last one that I did, so I'm going to just speed along and show you there's just very little differences other than you want to be sure that you lift some of that ink with water before you start painting it so that it doesn't really conflict. And I'm using more intense colors because of course this background is more intense. I love seeing the color go on and where the flowers really start to come to life. And moving on, that little cute little bud, it's so cute. I'm going to add a little bit of the yellow to that. And then we'll go on to the next flower. Now this one, because it has kind of an ombre effect, I'm going to color in the same way. So where there is yellow, I'm going to color yellow flowers. And then where there's pink, there's going to be pink flowers. And then going on, continuing on down the panel with more intense colors. Now I'm using a saltwater taffy and some worn lipstick. And I'll use a little bit of the picked raspberry, and I'm using festive berry as well. But first I'm going to go and lift a lot of this ink from the background. And then now I'll add on the saltwater taffy all over this flower, and then take my smaller brush and start shading with the darker color, darker pinks. And I stay with this very same color palette that I used before, but like I mentioned, I'm using a little bit more intense color. I'm just adding in the ink, and then I'll go back and kind of touch it up. But for now, I'm adding in, I'm wanting to get these flowers all colored. I'm using a combination of the yellows and the pinks with this flower because we're kind of transitioning now from the yellows to the pinks, and they do play nicely together. I use a little bit of the purples. I'm adding those in the Seedless Preserve, the Dusty Concord, and the Shaded Lilac. I'm going to lift this ink. You can really see how that lifted. That's actually really pretty just the way it is. But I'm going to add a little bit more accent and a little bit more intense color. These flowers are so beautiful that this background, like I mentioned, when we just did the gold and we hadn't painted any of the flowers, it was beautiful just like that. You could use silver too. The Delicata has a gorgeous silver that's also would be beautiful. Be beautiful for a wedding card or an anniversary especially. But I like really intense colors, and so this one really resonates with me. But I love the gold too. You can't quite see how gorgeous the gold is on camera, but it does have a beautiful glint to it. For this one now I'm putting in more purples because we're really down at the bottom where I had put on the background. I had used a lot of that Seedless Preserve. So now I'm using these pinks and the purples for this flower so that we get some real intensity. Now you see I didn't really blot much off of this first because I wanted it to be quite dark. And I like to vary the flowers so that Each one's a little bit different. Now I can't help myself. I have to go in and kind of fiddle with the color a little bit more on all of these flowers before I start in on the leaves. I had forgotten to do that little bit of the flowers before, so I'm just putting those, coloring those in before we start in on the leaves. Now using the same colors as before, the crushed olive, peeled paint, pine needle. All of these are distressings. I'm dampening the blotting off the ink, dampening it with water, and then blotting off the ink, and then adding first the crushed olive, just like before, and then the peeled paint, and then a little bit of the pine needle. Pine needle is a very strong color, so I use it quite sparingly. Now you can see that there's a lot of detail to this panel, which really makes it really beautiful. It's really nice to just go in and do some watercoloring like this. It's a nice, relaxing task. And I love how the green really brings out the flowers, really just makes them stand out. And those little buds are so cute. Just going to go in and get all of these leaves colored. Again, I really like contrast, so, and I love the intense colors. So this one I really, really enjoy doing. But as always, everybody has different tastes, so that you can tell me what you like. You can see up here by the yellow flower, the black background didn't really show through too much, and I wanted it to not have it look so faded. So I just have a sponge dauber there, and I have some black soot distress ink, and I'm just very gingerly adding that in to give it a little bit more contrast. And then, of course, I have to go back and tweak these flowers again, because I just can't leave it alone. I have to just keep at it. You finally get to the point where you just have to say, okay, enough is enough. Now that that's all done and it is all dry and it's trimmed, I went ahead and I did these. These are from the Hex Gem Sentiments. These are hot foiled. You can do a bunch of them at one time. That's the whole idea. Cuts out a bunch of them at one time. I did them in cream paper and in white paper so that I could kind of decide which ones I liked, and then I could just pick them out. I wanted a small sentiment because I didn't want it to overshadow the background. Putting some repositionable tape on the back of this panel that's an aubergine, a beautiful aubergine eggplant type color. It has texture to it too, which makes it really beautiful. It's in the supply list. It's all linked down below, so you can check that out. And then I have some really thin twine here where I'm tying this at the bottom. I'm going to first make a knot, and then I'll tie my bow. And my tails are a little bit long there, but I'll trim them in just a minute. I just want to get this all done, and then I have my sentiment. Like I say, I wanted these flowers to really be showcased, so I didn't want the sentiment to be too large, and I thought these that cut out that little banner were perfect for that. Now I'll add some more repositionable tape onto the back. and we'll put it onto my cream card base. And you can see I'm going to trim these guys off, and we're all set with this one. Now I went ahead off camera and I did the gold one as well, exactly the same way. I just added a little sprig of leaves using the same sentiments, but it's mounted on white. Here you can see a close-up of it. So it's on a white panel, and then the flowers, you can see it just really is gorgeous, and that gold is just comes through. And then this intense kind of really gorgeous colors as well. You can decide which works best for you, which one you like the best. You can tell that I kind of prefer this one, but I like really intense colors. And then just a recap, I'm using the Peony Background press plate by Spellbinders and that Hex Gem Sentiment Spellbinders, but every supply that I use is linked down below. You can just go and check it out. I want to thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give us a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, we would be over the moon if you would subscribe. Thanks again, and we will see you next time. Bye.